Welcome back, everyone. In today's video, we're going to be looking at my second round that I played in the Oregon Open. Now, it's been a while since my last recap video, and that's because in between the rounds, there wasn't a lot of time, so wasn't able to get any recaps until I'm home right now. However, I am going to be farming a lot of recaps now. So here we go. This is round two. I'm 1 out of 1 so far. We're trying to keep going and get some more wins. I'm playing a 1700, so I'm trying to put pressure on them early, even though I have the black pieces here. So we get c4, e5, g3, knight c6. We play a few book moves, and here f5 is a move to transpose into sort of a reversed Grand Prix. However, that's not really the type of reverse Sicilian that I'm used to, so instead I just play knight f6 and normal developing moves. Now the bishop usually goes to maybe g4, but I just went to f5 because I didn't really want to think too much in the opening. Maybe I should, or maybe I should just steady openings. A3, a5 to stop b4. I can also drop the bishop back to a7 if necessary. d3, queen d7. Now queen d7 does allow bishop g5, starting to double the knight. However, I wasn't really worried about this because if the bishop does overtake the knight, I've managed to castle queenside and try to attack, possibly. So my opponent doesn't do that, instead plays rook e1 to try to sidestep bishop h3, which would trade off the bishops. I castle kingside, knight d5, and knight d5 is kind of an interesting move because after I trade, there is a pawn on d5, which could be a target down the road. So after knight e7, I attack the pawn. However, I didn't see this move d4. I was expecting e4 by my opponent, after which I could move the bishop to either g4 or h3. And now I'd have a pretty good position because I have this very good bishop. Also, these center pawns could become targets, especially d3 is a little bit weak. But my opponent plays this move d4 instead. And now after I take, I was kind of thrown off by d4 because I just didn't see it, even though it's not like it doesn't give white a huge advantage. But at this point, I do make a pretty bad mistake that basically swings the game to white's favor for most of the rest of the game. So then knight d4 attacks the bishop, so I have to move the bishop somewhere. Now, I thought it made sense to put the bishop on this diagonal because that just wasn't the right place to put the bishop. What I should have done is just to play bishop to either g4, h3. H3 is best square because if my opponent takes, well then that's just obviously good. And if my opponent doesn't take, then I can take the bishop, or I can just leave the bishop here, which is a good square, and I can start rerouting my pieces, and I have a pretty comfortable position. But after I play bishop g6, this is a huge mistake because it allows e4, which not only solidifies the center, but also basically boxes in my bishop for the rest of the game, and that's going to be a huge problem. Now, what I kind of want to do is just to play bishop h5 to get rid of the really bad bishop. However, I just didn't see this idea, and even if I did, I probably wouldn't go for it because it just gives up the two bishops. So I play rook to e8, and right here I'm kind of shaken up, so I'm just trying some cheese with knight d5. So I'm hoping for b3 and then knight d5, and then take, so I take the knight. However, obviously that's not going to happen. And my opponent plays knight b3, attacking the bishop, and then trades off the bishop with bishop e3. So this is a good move because it's trading off my good bishop for this bishop that's barely moved. And now I play this move c5. I'm just trying to desperately get some queenside play. I could also play c6, and one of the benefits to c6 is because I didn't play the pawn two squares, I can take on d5 if I ever need to and try to maybe attack this pawn on d5, even though it's guarded really well by two pieces right now. So after c5, my opponent plays queen to b5, and what my opponent could have done is taken advantage of this move, weakening b5 by playing a4, and now my queenside is basically frozen, and I don't really have that much play anymore. So my opponent can now rewrite to c4 because I can never kick it with b5. My opponent will just take. Or if my opponent can ever have the chance to rewrite to b5, that would be very strong because it would attack my weakness on d6. However, my opponent misses this and instead plays queen e2. I play a4 now, stopping a4. And also just kicking the knight. Now I play b5 to stop knight c4. Now my opponent plays g4 and starts playing on the king side. So the idea of g4 is probably to stop f5. So I play f6 instead. I'm just trying to move the bishop somewhere. The bishop just doesn't really seem to have a future. Not on this diagonal, not on this diagonal. Probably not on this diagonal either. So this bishop is just really bad. So we got f4. White's trying to stand on the king side. However, with all these pawn pushes, now White's advantage has kind of... It feels like it's kind of almost slipped away because the computer says so. I don't actually know. This does look pretty bad for White. And during the game, I thought this was just really bad because my pieces just can't really move. Apparently, computers just know how to reroute the pieces, and yeah, they can like bishop f7, knight c8, and weird pawn moves. And somehow Black's not just really bad here, but I thought Black was a lot worse. So I just try to get some play on the queen side. f5, just restricting my pieces. Bishop has nowhere to go. Knight doesn't have any good squares. b4, knight c4, occupying this kind of an outpost. I take to try to get some play on the b file. Now I get rook b3, finally getting at least something. Queen c2. Now, here I had a very weird idea instead of b4, and that's to play queen to a7 with the idea of playing c4, opening up this pin, and then, so just say White plays these moves. I have this I maybe have this idea of c3 at some point because the rook cannot take, so the pawn would have to take. And if I get like a rook to c8 or something, I can try to play c3 and go after these pawns. Now this is a really weird idea, and I don't even know if it is an idea, but at least if I do this, the queen can try to maybe infiltrate at some point too. If I didn't see this idea of moving the queen to the side of the board onto this diagonal, so play b4 instead. After rook b3, queen c2, play knight c8, which isn't a great move, but I'm just trying to trade off this knight, and I thought that after rook takes and then queen takes b3, I could play bishop takes d5, and then after I trade off this knight, it's maybe okay with my pawns on the opposite color of the bishop. However, my opponent doesn't have to take the pawn, and instead just goes queen c3, and then uses this rook to pick up the pawn. I play knight a7 to try to get to d4, and this is just desperation, basically, trying to play queen a4 to check the king somehow. So I play h5 first, and the idea of h5 is to hope White does nothing and plays h3 first. And this is a mistake because it's just an unnecessary waste of a tempo. White doesn't have to do this at all. Well, I can just punish that I didn't do anything and take this pawn, queen a7, and just crash in on the queen side. However, my opponent thinks that he can play h3, which obviously White's still better. But now the advantage is I have this lift for my king, which is going to be kind of important later on. And it's going to make it so that I have a little more room to kind of try to cheese my opponent with my queen. So I play knight b5, queen takes b3, knight d4. These are all the best moves because the only thing Black can try here is desperate infiltrations. Again, knight takes d6. Everything's falling for me, but luckily this bishop is kind of locked in by the pawns, so White can't get this bishop involved. If this bishop was on this diagonal or something, this pawn wasn't here, the game would be over immediately because I would just be losing all my pieces. Rook's coming to b3. But with this bishop blocked off, I do have some chances to do some stuff. So I play rook f8. Queen goes to b2. Very nice move. White grabs 2 pawns and just starts chilling back here. And I'm just down 2 pawns. I play queen a6 to try to get a check here. However, this check is a mistake because my idea knight f4 does not work because I missed this move bishop to f1. Now, also at this point, it's worth noting that both of us were down to about 4 or 5 minutes with a 30-second increment. So we don't really have that much time to think about our moves, and obviously that doesn't really excuse missing bishop f1. It's a pretty simple move. But at this point, I'm not really too focused. I don't really have too many hopes for the game. I'm just trying to give my best shot at trying to cheese my opponent. So I play knight d3. I'm expecting king e3 here, and then I'll basically resign in a couple moves because nothing left to do. Play c4, just takes, and then after oh wait, no, after White saves the knight, White just up an entire piece, and the king just hides from the checks and lights up a piece, pushes this pawn, and wins the game. However, here my opponent plays a huge blunder and takes my knight. Now, this is only a mistake, but it cuts the advantage down by quite a bit, and that's because my queen can start to infiltrate now. And it's going to give some really annoying checks. And after knight d6, queen h3, I start to get some play on the king side here. And you'll notice that although my king only has 2 pawns in front of it, since white has these pawns here blocking these key diagonals, my king is very, very safe compared to white's king. And white's king is just susceptible to a lot of checks, especially queen h2 here, which would pick up the knight, and then it becomes very complicated. So my opponent plays the knight back to c4, and now I take this pawn. Now, at this point, I'm not really going to look at the computer feedback because I really don't care. If I play the best moves here, I'm going to lose the game because the best moves don't complicate the position. What I need to do here is play moves that are not necessarily the best, but create the most chances for my opponent to go wrong. And that's going to be from playing h takes g4, giving me this passed pawn, rather than trying to move the rook here and take the pawn. I don't even know what that's going to do. So h takes h4, queen b3, queen h2 check. I'm trying to push this pawn and just make a queen. So king e3, queen g3 check. Obviously, I'm supposed to push this pawn, but then I'm going to lose the game without much of a fight. So queen g3 check, queen f2 check, and I'm just checking the king because if you've ever done like chess.com puzzles where you're getting out of check, those puzzles are very, very annoying because you have to calculate a lot and you have to look at all the nuances of where the king goes and the consequences. So the reason I'm doing all these checks is to hope that my opponent puts the king in a bad spot, which is exactly what happens next after the move king c1. So this is a mistake because it goes in front of the rook, and now I can start pushing my pawn, and my opponent can no longer stop the pawn, and the game is now officially supposed to be a draw. So I've officially cheesed my opponent enough to where I can now just basically draw the game. If my opponent had played king c3, then my opponent would have this queen d1 and just 2 pieces on the first rank. I can't promote the pawn anymore. Obviously, it's still complicated because I have these queen d4 checks, and maybe in some cases picking up the knight. For example, g3, queen, or queen d1 actually takes away the d4 square. But there are still some chances, but king c3 is just winning, or king d3 would be winning for white. However, my opponent plays king c1. Now after g3, my opponent has to play knight c3, knight to e3, and sacrifice the knight. So if I play g2 here, this would have to be this would most likely be a draw because even though d6 is a move, I can just move the king, and it looks scary with the rook coming to the b file, but I can just keep checking the king, and there shouldn't be that many problems. However, here I try to be a little tricky with the move c4, and at this point we're both down to about 30 seconds, so we're just living off the increment here. We have about 30 seconds to think for every move. So my opponent responds instantly with knight d1, and I'm very shocked by this because I just have a feeling that, like an instinct, that this is not the best move, and it is a mistake, and it loses the game. However, with 30 seconds, it's kind of hard to figure out all the little intricacies of this position because knight's attacking the queen, I'm attacking this queen, I have a passed pawn. What's really going on? It's very difficult to figure all this out in 40 seconds, which is about what I had. So obviously the first thing I have to look at is just taking the queen. But I saw that after knight takes f2, my opponent has this move king to b2, which stops both pawns, and I would lose this pawn, and this endgame would be very scary. So I can't take the queen yet. None of the checks work because of queen e3 blocking, so I can't do that. Looked at moving the queen, but if I move the queen to like e1, my opponent just plays queen e3 and guards f2 and threatens to trade queens. And the other queen moves I looked at just hang the pawn, and unfortunately I did miss this move queen to h2, which is the winning move because it's very thematic and instructive because it protects all 3 of these squares that the pawn is on, kind of like in the king and pawn in games where kings are here and the pawn is here, and this is winning. However, in 40, I guess maybe in another universe I would have seen this, but unfortunately, in the game, I did end up playing g2 to just simplify the game into a draw, basically. So I played g2, knight takes f2. Now queen, and also the reason queen f2 is winning is because the queen is attacked. Queen has to move somewhere, and no matter where the queen moves, I just play g2 and g1, and white has to play this move rook to b2, which is also kind of hard to find, pinning the queen, so that after I promote, white only loses in exchange. White's only down in exchange. But with both sides in time pressure, the rook coming to b8, I'm pretty confident that I would just win this game. However, unfortunately, I wasn't able to find this. Instead, um, instead I play g2, and after takes, I promote with check. My opponent has to block with the queen. I take the knight, and now after a few more moves, we stop notating. Now, if you're familiar with the intricacies of the rules, you'll know that with a 30-second increment, you do have to keep notating for the rest of the game, which means me and my opponent have just committed a felony, and we should be locked up and go to jail. Unfortunately, fortunately, the tournament director was not around, and he did not call us out for it. And since we both stopped notating, I don't think we would have. I think the penalty's offset. Is that a football thing or something? I don't know. But anyways, we both stopped notating, and what happened was I did end up winning this pawn. However, I wasn't able to keep this pawn on c4 because my opponent just played d2 and d7, and I had to come back with the queen to take it, and my opponent took this pawn. And then after a random queen b3 check to force the queens off, it was just these pawns and rook versus rook. Nothing left to play for, and we agreed to a draw. And I think that at some point with this passed pawn here, I might have been winning at one point, but my opponent just very smart of my opponent, by the way, to just run the king to the king side here and to use these pawns as a shield, and I can't and just play for these checks. So the game does end in a draw. Um, so my opponent played very well in this game. I think, yeah, my opponent played extremely well. Uh, I think the chess.com gives an estimated rating of 2200. Now, obviously, that's not going to be accurate, but my opponent is obviously very underrated, as most people are in this tournament. I think by the end of the tournament, he scored 4 out of 6, which is insane in the open section for a 1700, and his rating got all the way to 1876, if I'm not mistaken. So very great tournament for my opponent. I think who got a lot of other very good results, drew another 2000, and okay, so that was so that was round two. I'm at 1.5 out of 2, kind of an unfortunate draw, but at least I did not lose the game. So I'll have another recap out soon. See you. Bye, everyone.